Welcome, I'm Ariana, and my company is Lloyd Collective, and we do these community fundraising workshops once a month where we have a clinician who specializes in a specific topic related to anti-racism work come and do it for you. If you want to, you can donate. We do a fundraising organization, but it's all by donation, so don't feel pressure. But the speaker donates their time. I generally match donations. At some point that's gonna run out, but I still do it now because of my values that I built into Lloyd Collective. So I've asked Silvana to speak to us today and to help us understand a bit more how to serve our Black, Indigenous, people of color. I found Silvana because we have a mutual connection and we both overlap as far as helping people build their businesses. We're both therapists and we both have a passion for business development, and it's actually quite hard to find therapists who also love business. So we made a really good connection, and I really love that her practice specializes in anti-oppressive services. So Silvana will speak for about 30 minutes, then we'll pause in the middle for donations. Silvana will tell you how you can work with her if you'd like to. I'll tell you a tiny bit about my 8-week private practice program. And then we'll end, and I'm going to share 3 mistakes that I've made serving the BIPOC communities so that you can learn those, because that's how we learn sometimes. Sometimes we learn by getting the information up front, sometimes we get it afterwards. So that's what we'll do today. And with that, Silvana, it's all you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ariana. And thank you everybody for being here. I am really excited to share this topic with you because as Ariana mentioned, I am also very passionate about this. I have shared in the chat box or in the chat column my presentation. I hope that everybody can see it so that you don't have to type or take any notes during the presentation. And you can focus on it and you can check it later if you want to. So before starting the presentation, I just wanted to tell a little bit more about myself. As Ariana mentioned, I am a therapist in private practice, and I focus on supporting mainly Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And the challenges that I focus on are acculturation, immigration, being the children of immigrants, first, second, third generations. And with that comes a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of racial issues, a lot of identity issues, a lot of intergenerational trauma. So I like to support my clients with that. And I do that. Yes, I use some evidence-based practices, but I like to see everything through an anti-oppressive, social justice and liberation-focused lens, so that it really fits the people that I am trying to help, that I am supporting. And I will speak a little bit more about that later. And as Ariana said, I also offer anti-oppressive clinical consultation, clinical supervision, and anti-oppressive private practice building, especially if you want to build a private practice that is insurance-based, which I know is a headache for most. It was a headache for me as well. I want to, let's begin sharing this. Here. Okay. Awesome. All right. So 3 questions to ask yourself when serving the BIPOC population. And the organization that I chose is CAUSA, Oregon's Immigrant Rights Organization. The reason why I chose them, first of all, they are a local, I need to admit someone because I am the, let's see, okay. They are the-
Silvana, if you want to make me
a co-host.
Yeah, or just make me the host again, but you'll still be able to share.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, that's
Let's see.
So you don't have to keep an eye on admitting people.
Yes, that would be great. Let's see, make host. There we go. All right. Awesome. So the reason why I chose CAUSA, I am an immigrant myself, and I am a very privileged immigrant. I moved to this country by choice. I speak English. I have a career. And I chose to settle here. And those are my privileges. And even with those privileges, it was very hard to move to another country. And several of the immigrants that I have worked with in community mental health, they don't have these privileges. They either fled their countries or they didn't have another choice but to move elsewhere because they wanted a better future for themselves or a better future for their children. And they have so many more challenges. So when I work with this population, my heart really was breaking. It just makes me so sad to see all the challenges that they have. I think about myself, even after 10 years or so of being in this country, sometimes I still feel like an outsider. And that is okay, because I know how to ask for help. I know where to look for that help, and I can communicate my need for that help. But several of the immigrants that I have worked with, they usually don't know what the resources are out there. So that is another reason why I chose this organization, because my hope is that they can keep on working and they can keep on supporting the immigrants that come to this country, that come to this state. So that is the reason why I chose them. And before we dive into the presentation, there's a couple of things. I appreciate that you all are leaving your video on. That will help me a lot because that allows me to interact with you. After all, I am a therapist, so behaviors and facial cues and all of that helps me a lot. So thank you if you can leave your video on, and I would understand if you want to leave it off. And if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me, ask the questions, or type them in the chat box. And Ariana, please let me know if there are any questions in the chat box so that I can answer them. Yeah, so let's begin. Let's see. So then the dilemma, treat or not to treat. Should I treat the BIPOC population or not? Let's see. Oh, there we go. I don't know why this is. Okay, location of self. This is where I want to begin before we go to the 3 questions. Maybe some of you are familiar with the location of self. Maybe some of you aren't. This is very important when working with individuals that maybe don't share my same identities. So my social location impacts how I see the world. And when I am interacting with someone with more privileged identities, if they are not aware of their location of self, they don't consider what is the gap between their experience and mine. And I need to know what is my location of self, and I need to know more about the other person in the room. What is their location? Because that's the only way that as therapists, we can help people heal. I need to see the individual fully, and I need to recognize the different identities that they occupy and what goes on along with those identities. We know that the clients that come to us, they want to be acknowledged, they want to be validated, they want to be held. And we can only do that if we are aware and if we are acknowledging all of their identities. And that's when healing can happen. So that's why location of self is important. And location of self is none other than, what are my identities, both the privileged ones and the subjugated ones, right? So I am going to give you an example. This is my personal example, right? In my case, I am a multiracial Latina. I am a POC. I am also an immigrant, but I am also identifying as a settler, and I live in Kalapuya land. Spanish is my mother tongue, or the first language that I learned. Then I learned Cantonese that I lost by socialization and conditioning. And English is my first acquired language. I am also a cis woman, able-bodied, neurotypical, born to middle-class university professors, and I am educationally privileged. This is not about me, but vicariously becomes about me. I am married to a white cis het man of upper middle-class origins. Every time that we go out and we are able to hold hands, I become less of the other because I am with this white man. So maybe for some people that is not a privilege, but I do see that as one of the privileges that I hold. And it's part of my social locations. And it's part of the identities that I am bringing to the therapy room, or to any room for this matter, with any other interaction, human interaction that I may make. So then let's have in mind this location of self for when we are thinking of these three questions to ask ourselves. The first question, should I treat or should I not treat Black, Indigenous, or person of color? It can be an ethical dilemma because should I treat a person with experiences that I am not comfortable with or that I don't know much about, right? But at the same time, what they teach us when we go to grad school is that part of our learning curve means being in a place of discomfort, right? So is the discomfort that I am feeling because I don't know about something, because I am learning, or what is this discomfort about, right? That is one thing that I should be asking myself. I should also have in mind the affinity. And affinity becomes even more important for historically underrepresented and marginalized groups. If I find myself as the only person with my identities, I wish to connect with someone that I am thinking may share some of my experiences. And that's the reason why affinity is important. And last but not least, identity. In other words, the person's stage of racial identity development, and that also matters. And I am going to talk a little bit more about that and what is the stage of racial identity development as well, which is also very important when we are deciding to treat or not to treat people of color. So,
hey, Silvana.
Yes.
For affinity, I don't think I fully understand it, and maybe other people do, but I'm not entirely sure what that means. And yeah, do you mind saying a little bit more about it?
For sure, for sure. So the idea of affinity is how much do I relate to the other person, right? What I have found in therapy and what several researchers say is that I need to work with someone who has had similar experiences as mine, right? I was reading a little bit about this yesterday, and the psychologist was talking about, I want someone who understands what I have been through, or I want to work with someone who maybe have had the same experiences that I have had, because maybe they will understand. I don't want to explain myself in therapy, or there are things that I don't want to explain. I want the other person to get. So that is affinity. And that goes for every identity that a person may have, not just race or ethnicity. That also goes for gender, that goes for age, that goes for all other identities that we hold as well. Does that make sense for affinity? Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Then let's move to the next slide. So what happens if you decide not to treat? Which is okay, right? Maybe you decide I shouldn't treat a person, Black, Indigenous, or person of color. In that case, make sure that you have the appropriate referrals by specialty, right? Don't refer a person who speaks Spanish to me just because I also speak Spanish. Refer them because it makes sense, right? Do they need someone who's an ADHD specialist? Then refer them to an ADHD specialist and let them know why you are doing that. And how do I do this? How do I have appropriate referrals? Well, you can network with other clinicians. If you can network with clinicians all over the state, even better, right? And then that will also allow you to suggest telehealth for treatment for your client. So maybe the appropriate clinician is not within the city where you live, but is somewhere in the state where you live. So networking will allow you to find someone, maybe not in your city, but somebody else in a different city that is appropriate for that person that you are referring out. And never forget to make this a collaborative and informed decision for the individual. Don't replicate the experience of rejection, right? If you are not going to treat this person, don't simply tell them, I am sorry, but I cannot treat you, because maybe this is an individual that has been rejected in the past, and maybe they don't understand why you are deciding not to treat. So spend some minutes, return the phone call or return the email and let them know, these are the reasons why I am not the best therapist for you. And these are the people that I want to refer you to because they do match this and this challenge that you are presenting with, so that the person can feel empowered and they can say, this makes sense. Therefore, I am going to this therapist or I am calling these people and see how it goes. So make it a collaborative and informed decision for the individual. But what happens if you decide to treat? If you decide to treat, remember to have a very clear, informed consent. And what do I mean by this? Tell the individual, this is the scope of my practice and this is the scope of my knowledge. Maybe I will be able to help you with this set of challenges, but not with this set of challenges. And the moment that you're dealing with this other set of challenges, I may need to refer you out to another clinician. Make it clear from the beginning that you are a specialist on ABC, but not on XYZ, so that they know that mid-treatment, you are not rejecting them, that you are doing this because it's an ethical decision and because you care about their treatment. And on the same token, seek supervision and consultation, even if you've done the trainings, even if you've been to all the countries, even if you know so much about race and ethnicity, keep on seeking supervision and consultation. Nobody can be an expert on these matters or a complete expert on these matters. In the case of crisis situations, remember that we always talk about a crisis plan, right? I may have to call 911, I may have to call the local county, the crisis services, but also remember community plan, because what happens a lot is that several individuals may be afraid of the police, or is the police trained to respond to a mental health emergency in your city? So the idea of a community plan is, are there people in your life, whether friends or family members, or even friendly coworkers, a neighbor, who can be there with you when you are not doing fine until the crisis worker arrives? Someone that you feel that is on your side, someone that you can trust, And if there are more people, the better. So remind the individual that you may have to call 911, but together with 911, he or she or they can have as many individuals as they feel comfortable with as part of their community plan as well. If you decide to treat, honor the individual's stage of racial identity and development. I will talk about this later, but the idea of the stages of racial identity development is, I can be a person of color, but maybe I am thinking from a subjugating stance. Maybe I have been so submerged in this country, in this culture that is not mine, that I am afraid of thinking differently. And on the other extreme, I have unlearned all these ways that are not mine. I have unlearned all these values that are not mine. And I am thinking with my values and with my actual goals from my actual identities. And there are several stages in between. So don't try to speed up that process of identity development in any of your clients. If your client wants to work on coping skills for anxiety, yes, maybe they would benefit from, I don't know, working on racial issues, but maybe that is not what they want to do right now. So let's not push that, because that can push the client away as well, right? Usually what I tell the client is, I will point out at the other doors where I see that there may be an issue, but I will not open those doors for you. I will wait until you are ready to open those doors, and maybe we can do it together, or maybe you need to do it with someone else. So don't push beyond what they want to do and the goals that they have. And remember that you may be supporting your fellow BIPOC clinicians. I don't want the referrals just because I'm a person of color. I want the referrals that make sense. And I do want to help my community, but I don't want to feel overburdened. I don't want to feel overwhelmed, because there are more clients than the ones that I can serve. So if you could take some of these clients because it makes sense, please do so. Any questions so far before I move to the next question to have in mind when treating BIPOC folks? Or any comments?
I was wondering, Silvana, if you recommend putting your location of self also like on your website, in your informed consent, like where do you recommend people putting it? Besides like in the session, you know, like in the therapy session.
Yes. That's a very good question. Because I haven't seen the location of self in the informed consent, or not a very extensive one. And I will be very honest, what has worked for me so far is to bring it up in session, in conversation. And I say this because usually when we get an inquiry from a potential client, they have seen our profile in a directory, or they have seen our website. So they have an idea of who we are. At least they have seen a picture. And usually we have an about section and we talk about ourselves a little bit. So this person decided to contact you because they resonate with you somehow. And I would say in session, in conversation, you can bring up your location of self, and it can come up in a very informal way. I think that when it comes up in a formal way, actually, it's when you can put some burden onto that person. The idea of, I just want to tell you, I just want to acknowledge that I'm a white person, and that this and that and the other. How do you feel about that? Or I will do my best to keep on learning and keep on growing. That sometimes can feel like a lot of emotions in the session, and emotions that your client does not need to hold. So just let it come up naturally. If they are talking about their experience, just remind them, you know what? I bet that sucks. And I just don't know, because I have never been in a situation like that because of my privileges. But I hear you when you say X, Y, Z. Does that answer the question?
Yes. Yeah. That's
awesome.
Super cool.
Any other questions before I move on to the second item? All right, let's move on then. So Latinx folks, of course, I want to talk about this because I identify as Latina. I think it would be very hypocritical of me to come here and say, this is how you treat Black folks, and this is how you treat Asian folks, and this is how you treat, I will talk about what I know the most and the experiences that I personally have. So that's why my second point is, what if within the BIPOC community, you are thinking of treating someone who identifies as Latinx? So the very first question, how do I address them? How Latinx, Latine, Latina, Latino? There's this other one with the @ sign that I saw at some point because it's supposed to be inclusive of men and women. Latin, Hispanic, Latin American, South American, Central American. Should I call my client, should I say that my client is Colombian, Argentine, or mixed identity, Brazilian American, or Ecuadorian American? That can be very overwhelming for some clinicians. And I would say use the term that the individual identifies with, right? So what is the right term? I don't know. Ask the client. Maybe your client will be annoyed, but remember that this is the learning curve, right? And they will get that you are doing it, not because you are a curious tourist, but because you really want to know more about them. And maybe you will keep on getting it wrong sometimes, and that is okay because it's part of your learning curve. Remember that their racial identity development may change over time. When I came to this country, I identified as Peruvian. At a later point, I became South American, not because I felt less Peruvian in any way, but because that was more useful in explaining where I was from. Now I identify as Latina, and that doesn't mean that I am any less South American or Latin American or Peruvian, but that is how I identify. So that also changes over time. So ask your client again and again. And language evolves as well. So a term that works today may not work in 5 years or even in a year. So that's why we should keep on asking. And within the Latinx population, remember that we have experienced, and not just the Latinx population, but we have experienced a lot of not fitting in a box, in a drop-down menu. So this is the reason why I highlight the asking. If you have an intake packet and the intake packet says that this is a Latino Hispanic male, maybe that's because there were not that many options in your intake packet. So still ask them, how do you identify? Is this term right? Oh, I am so sorry that the drop-down menu is not working. Please tell me how you identify. So be curious, be compassionate with yourself and with your client, and just keep on asking. Being Latino or being Latinx is intersectional, and this will happen with any other ethnicity as well. Within the Latinx community, you will find the so-called undocumented individuals, refugees, new immigrants, people who have been several generations in this country, second, third generations, or people who were always here. Latinx individuals speak Spanish, English, Portuguese, Spanglish, or maybe just a native language. So again, don't assume and always ask. And then within the Latinx community as well, I identify as brown, but there are also Afro-Latinos, Asian Latinos, multiracial, white Latinos, white passing Latinos as well. So again, maybe you see something, but always ask the client, how do you identify, or, what are your identities? What identities are you bringing to the room, or what identities are you feeling comfortable sharing with me? And I say this also because there is a lot of colorism in my community. Thank you, white supremacy. And there's also a lot of classism in my community. Thank you, white supremacy again. So this is the reason why I think it's so important to just ask and be compassionate and be humble and just ask the client, what are the identities that you feel comfortable sharing with me today? Maybe you'll feel comfortable 3 sessions down the road to share more of your identities, but just meet them where they are at. The last thing about the Latinx community, these are some amazing people to follow. They are all in the therapy world. Patricia Redondo, Celia Falikov, and Leticia Nieto. There are more people than this, but these are my 3 favorites. And if you are helping the Latino population, or if you're thinking about helping the Latino population, they have these amazing books and more than this. But this can be the beginning of you learning a little bit more about the Latinx population. Let's see. Okay, before I move to the next one, the 3rd point, are there any questions about working with Latinx folks?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
For sure.
Just that it's really, I totally agree that it's really important to hear how people identify and to mirror that. I mean, that's what we're doing with pronouns too, right? It's like your self-identity really matters to me. I'm doing my best to see you and hear you, especially if we're making a cultural cross. You know, we're having to cross a bridge of a divide. I just want to just cautionarily say, if someone identifies as American Ecuadorian, we just want to be careful how we talk about our clients in other settings, because in Eugene, there might be one person who identifies that way. Where Latina, I've heard Latina, Latino, Latinx, all those kinds of like more like this, we're lumping all these people into one category. I've heard criticisms about that. Like it doesn't really help reveal how that person identifies in the world, because it's just too broad of a category. So it's just that, that kind of like, sometimes I'll use a different pronoun for a client, especially if they have one of those, what I call designer pronouns. They, them is pretty common, but there's some other ones that are not as common. And when I have clients like that, I'll revert to a more neutral pronoun just to protect identity. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And that is so very true. And I think that we have a lot to learn, for instance, from the LGBTQ population, right? Your pronouns are your pronouns. It's not about, I feel uncomfortable using your pronouns. Your pronouns are your pronouns, right? I have heard the comment, I identify as Latina, but somebody told me, I don't feel comfortable with that. You are Latinx, right? So how can someone tell me what I am?
Totally inappropriate. Totally inappropriate. I'm going to tell you how to run your identity. Totally inappropriate.
Right. Whether it's your identity based on your race, ethnicity, gender, or so many other identities. Why should I tell you who you are? Right? Definitely. Any other questions before I move to the last item for today? Let's move. So how do I become more anti-oppressive if I want to work with Black, Indigenous, or people of color? We could spend hours, we could spend days, we could spend a lifetime. So please, this is just a dot in a whole canvas of things that we can do to become more think about it. And if you can change it, great. If you can't, adapt it. I like to use ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And I also throw in some CBT, but I will always say, and I use that through the lens of liberation psychology, anti-oppressive practices, and social justice. Because then I can adapt that to the people that I am serving. And I should also consider the second item. Am I incorporating my client's own healing practices? Maybe if you work with insurance companies, they don't care about that. But how important is for your client to, let's say, go to church, to pray, to read tarot, to go to a different type of healer, to go through a healing ritual? If that is important for your client, then that should be validated. Maybe it's not going to be in your treatment plan, but can you hold that part of their identity as well? Think about how you diagnose your clients. Remember at the beginning of the presentation when I was talking about the challenges that I like to help people with: acculturation, immigration, feeling like you don't belong, being from a second or third generation. Those challenges show up in what we know in Western treatment as anxiety, depression, sometimes PTSD, but also sometimes borderline personality disorder and bipolar, and sometimes psychosis, right? If I have a client telling me, I don't know who I am, I don't know where I am, I don't feel like I am in my body, this is not my country, but when I go to my country, it doesn't feel like my country, everything feels surreal. Sometimes those experiences are so misunderstood. So yes, you may need a diagnosis for insurance purposes, but what are the experiences that you are holding in the room? And how are you measuring the client's progress? Are you measuring progress? They are no longer a 9 on the PHQ-9, they are a 3. Or are you measuring healing? They now feel at home in their body. They no longer feel like a stranger to themselves, right? So let's have that in mind. Examine how you interpret your board codes of ethics, dual relationships, bartering for services. Do you live in a small town? Are you maybe treating siblings without them knowing it because you are the only provider with that specialty who speaks that language? So that's also something to have in mind. Examine how you engage with white colleagues, with white peers. Do you call them out or do you call them in? I will call them out if I have the energy, but then I need some of that energy to heal. But I would like you to call them out, but then teach them. I would like you to use that energy to call them in and tell them that was racist, and let me tell you why. Whereas I can only tell them that was racist, but then I need to heal. I need to retreat to heal. So also call them in if you can. Observe how much representation there is at your workplace, and remember that those individuals are not the experts on their culture. Remember that anti-oppression is not just about race, as somebody mentioned before, but it is about all of the identities that somebody holds and how they should be accepted, welcome, included, respected, honored, etc., 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 in the treatment room, so that they know that that experience can be replicated outside of the treatment room. And consider how white supremacy has influenced your profession, from the hiring practices to your relationship to time, money, perfectionism, professionalism. And my last slide, this one is very busy, very on purpose. Why am I doing this? If you are looking at this from your iPhone or from a tablet, maybe you cannot read this. And this is very on purpose. Why? Because this is a list of just some books. How many books are enough for me to read to become anti-oppressive? I don't know. I don't know if there's a list, if there's the list of books that make me anti-oppressive. And I have very purposefully kept some people out Abram Kend is not here, Ta-Nehisi Coates is not here, Tarana Bjork is not here. We know about them. Maybe you know about some of these individuals, maybe you don't, but the idea is this list is busy, this list is overwhelming. Well, being anti-oppressive is equally overwhelming, and I will never ever finish doing this job, right? So later today, you can Google these individuals if you don't know them. All these books are amazing, but this is in no way a list or the list. It's just, again, one dot in the big canvas of anti-oppressive work. The last thing, remember that I am talking only from my experience, the experience of one therapist using anti-oppressive practices. And this experience is going to be different than that of any other BIPOC clinician, any other Latinx clinician, any other Spanish-speaking clinician. So let's keep on learning and let's keep on asking. And remember that anti-oppressive practices are going to make you a better therapist for your clients, but they are also going to make you a better human being, a better person for your community, a better coworker for your fellow BIPOC therapist as well. And that we never finish learning all of this. And that's not showing up. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. The last slide that you should be seeing is my contact information, but it's not showing up. So it may show up eventually, or you have it in the slides that I shared with you. I would love to continue this conversation. If you have any other questions that you don't want to make today, that you don't want to ask today, feel free to get a hold of me. And we can continue this conversation. So thank you so much for your time. There you go. That's my contact information if you want to get a hold of me.
Yes, and you have a beautiful website.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Silvana. That was amazing.
You're welcome.
Way more than I bargained for. That was so helpful and clear. So we're going to pause here, and Silvana put a lot of work into her presentation. She donates her time, and instead of getting payment for it, we fundraise and we donate to CAUSA. And actually, I'll find the link really quickly. And my organization matches those donations, and that's part of the values of Lloyd Collective, which is to be very much an anti-racism organization in practice, but also with money, because I think that is pretty powerful as well. So CAUSA Oregon is the immigration advocacy organization. And if you would like to donate, you can. When you go there, you'll see a donate box on the top right. Once you donate, if you want your donation matched by Lloyd Collective, then you can private message me and let me know what your amount was, and then I'll match it. And if we'll add up the total at the end of the presentation, which is just in 10 minutes. So I'm going to say very briefly about Lloyd Collective, and then tell you the 3 mistakes I've made working with Black and Indigenous people of color in my private practice. So my business helps people set up a private practice. They do it through an 8-week program from start to finish. They set up their practice. And the goal is that we're getting more people with the values communicated here in private practice, serving in an informed way, and just providing a better quality of therapy services. That's my goal. And I really believe in the power of clinical work, but I also really believe in the power of business, and that we can make so much difference with both of those things together. So I wanted to say briefly 3 things that I learned by making mistakes. So you don't have to repeat these ones. One thing that I learned in my private practice, the first mistake was I learned that I do a lot of group work. Thanks, Kaseja. I do a lot of group work. And what I've learned is that in general, if I'm working with someone with very different identities than me, having them just in my group, but not working with them individually is likely going to cause problems, because we haven't made a relationship or a good enough connection for me to know how to be appropriately sensitive or appropriately attuned. And so then there will be cues that I miss. So if you are working with someone on a group level and they're in the Black, Indigenous people color community, or maybe they have a different gender or sexuality or something significantly different than your own, I recommend working with them on an individual level as well, even if that means you're just doing like 15-minute video check-ins once a month. So that's the first thing I wanted to share. The second thing I wanted to share is equity pricing. So when you go to set up a private practice or business, you're likely going to consider equity pricing. And I put mine on my website, but I put it like with an asterisk and then put it at the very bottom. And I had a good colleague of mine review my website and tell me, you know, like where the white supremacy was showing up. And she said that if you're making it hard for someone from the BIPOC community to receive your equity discount, it's like people don't want to ask for it, right? Like it's just uncomfortable, it's vulnerable. So to make it like as easy as possible for somebody to receive equity pricing. And then the third thing I wanted to share was when you're communicating, and I'm saying all this as a white clinician. Yeah, so that's my perspective that I'm sharing. When I'm communicating my values and my goal of being anti-oppressive, finding the best tone takes some practice. And what I found is it's really easy to come out swinging and be like, I'm 100% in it. And, you know, like whatever, you know what that looks like. You see it all over social media. It's also easy then to realize you swung too far and go the other way and be silent, but not let people know some of the advocacy work you're doing, or that you're going to protest, or that you're donating, or that you're doing work. So finding that right tone in the middle communicates your humility, communicates that you're learning as you go, but that you're committed, is really important, because people need to know that you're committed to doing anti-oppressive work. Don't assume that they're just going to pick up on that from your aura. So they need to know, you need to have that explicitly stated somewhere. But they also don't want to hear, especially, and this is my perspective, that you as a white person are like on top of the game and can call everyone else out, because it's just not true, obviously, for any of us. Like Silvana said, I wrote this down because it was so beautiful, like being anti-oppressive is equally overwhelming, you know, and we'll never ever finish doing the work. So finding a tone and a way to communicate that to people is really important. So those are the three things I wanted to share. It looks like we raised $250 for CAUSA. So thank you to those of you who donated. I really appreciate it. Any final questions, thoughts, remarks before we wrap up?
Hey, Silvana, I really appreciate your presentation. You're awesome. And one thing that I'm going to take with me is your comment about considering incorporating my clients' own healing practices into the interventions and the sessions. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for saying that. I think it's very important because that's another way in which we're validating the individual that we're working with. And it's another way in which we are empowering them and giving them agency, because that's usually the experience that they have not had in the outside world. So the more we can give them agency, the better.
Any other takeaways that people have, or anything that surprised you in the presentation? And of course, anything also that confused you that you need clarity on? right. Silvana, I think you answered every possible anti-oppressive question people will ever have.
I wish.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thanks for donating. Yeah, I'll keep you posted on the next month's work, but